the New Arts and Media Studios in Milwaukee. I'm Charles Purcell. This is The Log. Here's what we need to talk about today. The Republican Party is no longer a legitimate political party. And it's time we all said so loudly, including, and most importantly, the media. All the major outlets, all the websites, publications, cable networks, everybody, all the news organizations, if they want to have any credibility in history, they have to stand up right now and declare that the Republican Party is no longer legitimate and they're not going to cover them the way they have been covering them. So, I don't know if you need to hear this. I mean, you know this, right? Or maybe you don't. Maybe you still think that they're a party. So many people say, oh, well, we have to have two strong parties. Well, I disagree with that. I think we need to have a diversity of political opinion, but having two strong parties, no. Several strong parties, yes. No parties at all, I'd like to try that. But let's just focus right now on why the current Republican Party, the MAGA Party, is just unacceptable. Every day in the news, we get another example. And it's like the drip, 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 and it becomes kind of numbing. We don't notice after a while. The Orange Menace says another outrageous thing. Well, okay, just to take a few recent examples. The Republican National Committee. They've got their new leadership in place, and it's 100% now loyalists to the Orange Menace. Of course, it's the daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, and just hired as a senior counsel. Here, what's his title? Senior Counsel for Election Integrity. In charge of that, Trump lawyer Christina Bobb. You remember her, right? She's gotten lots of press time, screen time over the last year. Yeah, she's now senior counsel in the RNC, a major player in trying to overturn the 2020 election. We have literal criminals running the RNC. And when you run the RNC, you're running the Republican Party. You think Mike Johnson has any sway, has any pull? Even Mitch McConnell's days are over. No, it's all centered now. It's a one-person rule. And in what might be good news for their opponents, I'm not sure what this means. The RNC is just purging from their organizational chart here any kind of DEI, right? Because DEI is bad, diversity, equity, and inclusion. They had, I guess, a couple dozen Hispanic community centers that they've closed. There are these outreach arms to Hispanics and people of color and whatnot, and that's just gone now. They had this big purge in the RNC. So the mechanism for how all this works, again, this might be great news for MAGA opponents, but we'll see. Of course, the recent hoopla about the Orange Menace use of the word bloodbath. I don't know if you and I ever really talked about this, but you understand how this guy talks, right? Have you? Well, maybe you don't. If you ever listen to one of his speeches, which I know is hard to do, but you got to do it occasionally just to, keep up on what's happening. If you listen to the whole speech, you'll notice how he jumps around. He just goes, his famous bing, 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 bang, bing, bing, bing. That's what he does. From topic to topic, he'll interrupt himself in mid-sentence to go off to a different topic. He says one thing, it reminds his addled brain of something else, and then he immediately goes to it, often in mid-sentence. And if you're familiar with his rhetoric, you can't really call it rhetoric because that implies some intention. If you're familiar with his speech patterns, that's what he does. He's really gone quite insane. He even talks about it himself. I saw him in one speech talk about that he does that. He's aware that he does it, but he was bragging that he always comes back to the topic because he's so cognitively blessed, right? He's the stable genius. So he knows he does it. Well, I bring this up because that's what happened if you listen to the quote, which is this on the bloodbath. Now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole, and he was about to say auto industry. or maybe economy. One of the two. Now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole, and now his brain hears bloodbath. And he changes topic. Bang, he pivots mid-sentence. And he says, that's going to be the least of it. So that's where the switch is. Because he heard the word bloodbath, and now he thinks, oh, you know what? It's going to be a bloodbath for the whole country, and that's what he says. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country, continuing the quote. That will be the least of it. What does that mean? That means the topic he was already on, the auto industry. The auto industry will be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the whole country. Now back to topic, but they're not going to sell those cars. They're building massive factories and then on with his thing. So that's how his brain works. And it's kind of obvious when you see it a few times. Now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole, pivot. That's going to be the least of it, which he says twice. What's going to be the least of it? The auto industry. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That, meaning the industry, will be the least of it. Okay, so that's how it works. I don't mean to go off on that one little point, but it's important to understand where this guy is. So yeah, the bloodbath quote, serious, extremely serious. The Republican Party is MAGA. MAGA is the Orange Menace, and more, because many of the so-called leaders or influencers on that side of the aisle have taken up his mantle. And they're not only riding with him, they're going right along. The Republicans are working for him. The whole Robert Hur investigation into Biden, where he calls him an elderly man with a bad memory. The Biden impeachment. All the entire landscape of culture war lies and ridiculousness. By the way, recently Florida has had a couple of rulings that are a little bit of a reprieve. The Don't Say Gay law and the Stop Woke law both kind of got a kick in the pants recently, so that's good. But that's where they are. The GOP, grand old party, is no longer legitimate. It's time we all say so out loud, including the media, especially the media. Because whether it's cowardice or complicity, they are with him. They are one and the same. You know, a bunch of people made a big deal about Mike Pence not endorsing the Orange Menace. But he said right in that statement, in that interview, when he said, I'm not endorsing, Pence said, coward that he is, and his own form of complicity, he said regarding all the he's a Nazi kind of stuff and January 6th and all that. No, none of that. That's not why he's not endorsing him. He said, in that very same interview, I've forgiven him in my heart for January 6th. That's not why he's not endorsing him. He's not endorsing him because he's not conservative enough. He's not conservative enough on abortion, on regulation, on economics. Pence was very specific about that. So no, you can't put Pence among others like there are a couple that stand out. Of course, the three that we all know about, Mitt Romney, Adam Kinzinger, and Liz Cheney. The last two, of course, on the January 6th committee. Those are three Republicans who really speak out. And to a certain extent, Chris Christie, but now he's completely lost his voice since he dropped out of the race for president. So those are rare birds. Others, like Mike Gallagher, a U.S. representative from my state of Wisconsin, just ups and quits. He just can't do it anymore. He doesn't. Maybe once he's officially out, maybe he'll make a statement. Maybe he'll say something. But some of them are just quitting. Kent, I forgot his first name. Several Republicans are just quitting. They can't take it anymore. But this is what the Republican Party is. They are no longer a legitimate party, and it's time the media says so. The influence of Russia. This has gotten really weird. Of course, Russia just had their election that wrapped up this last Sunday, just short of 88% for Putin. Pretty good. This is where the Republicans are. They're absolutely in bed with Russia. That's why no more aid to Ukraine. That's why they're ragging on Ukraine all the time. Literal Russian talking points are showing up in the halls of Congress. Lies. Just like Rudy Giuliani and Lev Parnas. Is that how you pronounce his name? And his partner, I forgot his name. Yeah, Parnas just testified before Congress about how it was just all a pack of lies. They were looking for dirt on Biden. That's why the first impeachment. Talked about how Senator Ron Johnson was their guy in Congress. Get the lies, get the talking points, pass them along. Yeah. So ragging on Ukraine, using Putin talking points about how Ukraine is a bunch of Nazis and they're corrupt. People like these new conservatives. We never thought, in the old days, Elon Musk was just kind of a fascinating weirdo. But now he's very much firmly in the neoconservative, right-wing, radical, whatever you want to call him, camp. And he's defending Nazis on his social media platform, which I still call Twitter and always will. Yeah, he's literally defending Nazis. One example is this, I guess there was a Nazi cartoonist who some people outed his real identity. And Elon just bent over backwards to punish the people who outed the Nazi and to protect the Nazi. I don't care how much you love free speech. You gonna go that far? Oh, Michael Whatley. That was the name I was trying to think of. I see it here in my notes. He's the new chairman of the RNC. Michael Whatley, another person deep in the MAGA world. He's the new chair after Ronna McDaniel. Oh my God, we haven't talked about Ronna McDaniel yet. I'm going to need a couple hours today. So yeah, he's the new chair of the RNC with co-chair Laura, daughter-in-law. Whatley was chairman of the North Carolina GOP, of course was handpicked by the Orange Menace, and has been a main purveyor of the big lie. So yeah, that's another reason why the GOP is illegitimate. That is the litmus test. You have to be an election denier. You have to agree with the big lie. Getting back to this whole Russia talking point thing, you remember also, again, the news cycles go fast. The Alexander Smirnov story, he was the main source, the big star witness for the Republicans in Congress to impeach Biden. Alexander Smirnov had all this dirt, and it turns out he's a damn Russian spy. Just lied about everything to the committee, and they were all Russian lies. Makes a headline for a couple days, and then we move on. It's amazing. Any one of a dozen things that happen every day would be 3-inch font headlines. Or would have been just a few years ago. And anybody involved in these stories would be out on their ear. Presidents, senators, congresspeople, their careers would be over. All of them. They'd be done. They would be disbarred. They would be ostracized. They would be stricken from the community. But now, a dozen things happen every day, and we're numb to it, and they all just continue. So the media has to stand up. Absolutely has to stand up. Getting back to the Orange Menace for a second, and the whole bloodbath thing, and this new book that came out recently that reminded us a couple of terrible things about, well, why can't we just shoot protesters in the legs? And think for just a second, how different is the Orange Menace from those he admires? He loves Putin. We all know it. What would Putin do that the Orange Menace would not do? Rig elections so he gets 88% of the vote? Kill political rivals? What would the Orange Menace do that Xi in China wouldn't do? Rig the legislature just to be a rubber stamp? Camps of Uyghurs? What makes you think that the Orange Menace is different from these guys in any way? And anything they're capable of doing, he's capable of doing. Doesn't that just make sense to you? His love letters with Kim Jong-un of North Korea. What would Kim do that the Orange Menace wouldn't do? Where do Where do you draw the line of demarcation? Because I don't see one. Bolsonaro, formerly of Brazil, president up until just a year or two ago, just decimated the rainforest. Every radical, right-wing, austere policy you can name, Bolsonaro was there. And, of course, had his own January 6th type riots trying to win back the election he lost. Sound familiar? Viktor Orban of Hungary, the darling of CPAC. What makes the Orange Menace different from any of these people? Speaking of CPAC, I'll give you two more, which didn't get a lot of press, but the president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, and Javier Milei of Argentina, also darlings of CPAC, and as right-wing as you can get, violent, talk about shooting protesters in the legs. Bukele of El Salvador gets some credit, actually, even in his own country, for cracking down on violence, but it's the way he did it. Of course, drug gangs were and are a problem. But he said, you know what? Violence, fine. Just kill them. Is that what you want? And especially put that in the context of the current Republican Party just going off on violent crime in America. Is it a problem? Of course. Who wants violent crime? Nobody. But the extent to which they say it's a problem is just another one of their lies. And it's another excuse to have an authoritarian government that can crack down on this horrible violence. Oh my God, and the immigrants are going to show up at your door. They're going to knock on your door and they're going to walk in. Your suburban housewives, I'm not making this up. This is not hyperbole. This is out of their mouths. The Orange Menace said it just in a speech the other day about how an immigrant is going to knock on your door, suburban housewife, and demand to use your kitchen. They're just going to walk in and take over. I mean, it's insane. It's crazy. So it's time for journalists to just take all this in and stand up and announce it. Like, you got to write op-eds. You got to have, the president of NBC, who recently fired Ronna McDaniel, good for him. You probably know this story. Ronna McDaniel, former chair of the RNC that we were just talking about. NBC made the stupid decision to hire her because, of course, you have to have voices on all sides. You have to have both sides. But this is not a both sides issue anymore. She represents a wing of American politics that is no longer legitimate. And journalists have to say so. And the owners, God, I mean, that's the problem. We have to get rid of owners entirely. I mean, that's, God. But under our current situation, we have owners. And they have to stand up and say, no, we're not going to do this anymore. So good for the journalists at NBC, especially MSNBC. All of them pretty much in unison stood up and said, no, we're not having this. We can't have Ronna McDaniel, a purveyor of the big lie. Can't have it. So good for the suits at NBC who reversed that. And they said, nope, Ronna McDaniel, you just stay home. We're not going to use you after all. Their statement was kind of weak. They said something about how, well, we have to have unity in the group, and a lot of you don't like this, so we're going to honor that. What they didn't say, what they should have said, this was a terrible mistake. We never should have hired her in the first place. She is beyond the pale. She's not acceptable. Yes, we want to have a diverse spectrum of political opinion in our presentation of the news. I agree with that. I do agree with that. But the Republican Party, they should have said, is no longer a legitimate party. Her politics is not legitimate. It's not American. It's anti-American, and we're not going to cover them the way we cover other people. Jon Stewart learned this rule. There was an interesting op-ed, an opinion piece about how he's done, I think it's 4 episodes now since he's been back as host of The Daily Show. He does Monday nights. And his first couple of episodes, his first one especially, was very both-sidist. Just kind of picking on both Biden and Trump as though they're equally bad. Oh, they're both old and, And people just jumped on Jon Stewart. And according to this opinion piece, he's sort of seen the light, Jon Stewart. But we can't be having this. And it continues. A couple weeks ago, when they were both at the border, some of the headlines: Biden and Trump face off at southern border. New York Times: in border visits, Biden and Trump try to score points at a political hotspot. President Biden and former President Trump used dueling visits to the U.S.-Mexico border to blame each other of the country's broken immigration system. Talk about both-sidism. One of them was the President of the United States trying to get things done, and the other one was the Orange Menace lying through his teeth, and he had just ordered the Republican Party, which is now fully in his control, ordered them not to accept the immigration bill that they had all agreed on, a very conservative immigration bill, because he wanted to use it as a cudgel to continue to beat on Joe Biden through the election season. It's like when Ronald Reagan was having secret talks with Iran, telling them not to release the hostages until after the election. That was all set up. If you're old and remember, or if you read your history, you'll know that the hostages were released on Inauguration Day, the day Ronald Reagan was inaugurated President of the United States. And it was all arranged by Reagan's people and Iran. The Washington Post: Biden and Trump trade accusations at southern border. We can't be having this. I heard Ed O'Keefe on CBS just yesterday, I think, called Mark Robinson a conservative. If you don't know Mark Robinson, we got to talk about this guy. He's running for governor in North Carolina. He just won the primary. Their current lieutenant governor, and he's a complete and utter whack job. He almost makes the Orange Menace look normal. So the media should cover the Orange Menace and the Republican Party, the entire Republican Party, just like they would cover conspiracy theorists. You don't give a conspiracy theorist equal time. You don't write headlines like the ones I just read. Oh, flat earthers and round earthers have debate. No, they don't do that. They don't cover cults. They don't cover violent cults or violent militias with this kind of deference. But that is exactly what the Republican Party has become: a violent cult, a violent militia. They absolutely have an armed militant wing. How does the U.S. media cover Putin? How did they cover the recent election? They called it what it was. And it's time that the media starts talking about the Republican Party in exactly the same terms and make it very clear. Especially since, by the way, you know that the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are not in the Constitution, right? They're not part of government in that sense. They're private organizations. Show me party. Show me the word party in the U.S. Constitution. Show me the word Republican or Democrat or Whig or Know Nothing. Show me any party. They're not in the Constitution. These are private organizations, and they do not deserve the kind of deference they're being given. Now, today it's all about the Republicans. You know I can't stand the Democrats, but it's lazy thinking just to put them in the same boat. They're not the same. I despise the Democrats for a whole different set of reasons. And given the choice, I'll take a Democrat over a Republican 10 times out of 10. For all the reasons I've already said, and my differences with the Democratic Party aside, at least for the most part, they're sane people. Look at Bob Menendez. He gets in trouble for doing bad things, and the whole party pretty much, they don't come to his defense. The Republicans have lost all credibility. You can't take them at their word. Look at Ronna McDaniel and that horrible interview she did on Meet the Press last Sunday. The point is, you don't know when they're telling the truth anymore. I imagine once in a while they tell the truth. You can't really know. Because as the old line goes, how do you know they're lying? Their lips are moving. They've lied to such an extent, and they've said such outrageous things that they've lost all credibility. It's like if you lost trust in somebody, you can't just pick and choose when you're going to trust them. No, it's done now. So it's time, media. It's time. And you don't have to be a lefty. You don't have to agree with me and my politics on this. Right now, I'm speaking as part of a broader coalition. I'm speaking for myself and for my fellow lefties, but I'm also speaking, I think, or I'm trying to speak for the wider coalition of sane centrists. And you know there's nobody I despise more than a centrist. You know that, right? They're the ones who enable the far right to get where they're going. Without the capitulation of centrists, the radical right would never be where they are. So I have no love at all for the Democratic Party and for centrists. But right now, we have to be in a coalition against the radical, autocratic, right-wing, fascist, neo-Nazi. There's lots of terminology out there to utilize. And the media needs to start using that. They can't just, like Ed O'Keefe of CBS, you can't just toss the word conservative when you're talking about somebody like Mark Robinson. I wonder what the AP Style book has to say about this. Who do you call a conservative? Who do you call an arch-conservative? How do you define the terms right, or the far right, or right-wing, or Republican, or MAGA, or Christian nationalist, or ethno-nationalist, or white supremacist, neo-Nazi? I mean, these terms are a little more specific. And in the best of circumstances, maybe you don't use these terms at all. You just describe accurately what people are doing and saying. But you can't just toss out a harmless little word like conservative when you're talking about craziness. So, media, get on it. As for you, kind listener, I'm going to ask that when you do take in corporate media, you're listening always with this filter and this understanding. And I'm going to ask you to reduce your intake of corporate media and seek out free media. Your local community radio station, Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman. There are some publications, some outlets out there that do not take corporate money. I believe The Nation is still clean. I think they do not take corporate money. There's some others. I think ProPublica, if I'm not mistaken. They're out there. Find them. Find local sources, find community sources, and the bigger names, find the non-corporates. All right, media, go do what you need to do. Okay, for this episode and all other episodes, go to wherever you find your podcasts, or even better, go to the website, charlespurcell.com. Everything is there. You'll find this and all the other titles in the podcast series. Thanks to our flagship terrestrial station, one of the greatest community radio stations in the world, WXRW River West Radio, riverwestradio.com, right here in Milwaukee. If you want to reach out to me, I'd love to hear from you. Write to me at charlespurcell@gmail.com. Follow on Facebook. And as always, thanks to Peter Donalds, who wrote and performed the theme song. Okay, there it is. That's the log. I'll see you.